Welcome to Slight Reliability, the show where we learn SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm Stephen Townsend. Welcome to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn about SRE and observability about 1 week at a time, sometimes more. Today, I am joined by Valeska Victoria, and we're here to talk about this theme of rapid incident response in, I guess you call, high-pressure situations. Valeska graduated from the University of California at Santa Cruz, UCSC, with a degree in computer science and bioinformatics. I don't know what that is. What's bioinformatics?
Well, I can go into that if you'd like.
Yeah. Just like what's the elevator pitch for bioinformatics?
So it's intimately related to programming because it requires programming, usually in Python or R. It is all about biological data sets. So genetics or EKG machines or anything like that that produces high cardinality biological data that needs to be processed and interpreted in some way in order to have relevance for research or for medical interpretation.
That's super cool. Awesome. She had a 1.5 year experience after that as an SRE at eBay, where she solved a variety of problems and also created various advanced statistical approaches. I'm guessing the bioinformatics would come in handy there, to identifying and categorizing potential incidents. She also loves to hike, ballroom dance, do ballet, play instruments like the ukulele, guitar, and sing. She loves to scuba diving, which sounds truly terrifying to me. And welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
I thought we could start by talking about your role at eBay. What was your role? And like, you were an SRE, but what kind of work were you doing, or how did you get involved at eBay? How did it start?
Right. So it was pretty cool because they had come to UCSC and they were here for the purposes of recruiting students for internships. And I last minute checked my email and I saw, hey, there's a career fair that started like an hour and a half ago and it's like halfway over. And I was like, oh, I should go over there. So I was studying, or I don't know, whatever I was doing. And then I just I had already printed out resumes and I had them in a little folder and I put on my nice little professional clothing and I was like, I'm like 20 years old, or whatever. I don't remember how old I was. I'm going to go try to figure out how this is. So anyway, I went there and I didn't know what companies were there. And I just happened to go left because I saw that there were different signs. You could go left or right. And this one had eBay and some other companies that seemed more interesting. Talked to the guy from eBay. He was very impressed with my background in Linux and networking, specifically that I worked a lot on a C mesh net called Netsuku, which is a whole distributed thing, has distributed DNS and all that sort of stuff with a group node structure. It's pretty cool. It's a thing I learned to program in order to be part of that project when I was 15. And so he put in a recommendation for me to be part of the internship process, and that went through, and I joined in a few months for that summer as an intern. And I worked there as a site reliability engineer intern. I didn't really know what that was. I knew it was somehow related to programming, but I didn't really know about all the ops and that kind of stuff. And so I learned a lot there during the internship. But what I did mostly during the internship was a lot of systems programming, mostly. Well, okay, no, systems is not quite right. What I mean to say is operations. And by that specifically, it's more like monitoring tools that I created mostly with Python for monitoring data from Prometheus, Loki, and all these different sources, combining them together in different aggregation queries and applying some analysis to it. Then I graduated. I got accepted to a full-time position. They were very eager to hire me. So I joined. And when I was there, that is when I did more of the SRE sort of stuff. So that's when I became, part of the on-call rotation with PagerDuty. I became part of writing a variety of reports, like root cause analysis reports, reviewing reports, and there's a lot of paperwork that's involved when you're an SRE in a very large organization, just reviewing things that other people have written, writing your own
Yeah.
things, fact checking. It's like, oh, this person made a report, and a lot of it's kind of ambiguous. Like, there's not always that much guidance on what exactly you're supposed to do. It's kind of just like, just figure things out, be free, which was kind of overwhelming considering that I'd never worked in the tech industry before. So I was like, I don't really know what, but I decided I was going to look into all these different issues that were currently pending without a resolution and also ones that had recently been solved. That was basically what I wanted to establish for myself, that I was going to do that. And so I did that. And what I discovered is that basically there's a big range, right? Any given root cause analysis can be all the way on the end of like a title and a screenshot to like several pages, right? And everywhere in between. But what I noticed is that there was a surprising amount that were either kind of in the middle or a little bit towards a terser end. And as I investigated further, sometimes I'd figure out that there was actually some important information that was left out. Or in many cases, there was a reasonable assumption that was made based off of experience, right? From very experienced people that wrote this thing up. And there was some evidence put in there to support it, but it wasn't very strong evidence. And in some of these cases I would review when the data was still available, because we only had a few days until the high cardinality data would be deleted. And I would find that sometimes it wasn't quite accurate. It was a very good idea, but it wasn't always exactly the right approach, because sometimes what you think is probably the problem, because you've seen it before and you see some signs, when you dig into it, it's like, well, no, actually, that's like a part of it, but that actually happened after the real root cause, which is actually something different, which isn't really a knock on anyone particular. In particular, it's mostly just like, this is a field that requires very good attention to detail. And that was one of the things that I think I really excelled in. A lot of people, I remember, would compliment me on that I had very good attention to detail. You just really have to narrow down and laser focus on these different things. The problem is you have to also have enough of the big picture to know where to look, because it's so complicated. There's so much to look at. And I think a lot of people get either too far in the weeds and they can't see the forest for the trees, which kind of is a problem when you're trying to figure out what's going on, because they get stuck in this one quadrant, and that's not where the problem is. And then other people are so big picture that they can't really pay attention to the fact that you have to really dig in a little bit more and find that, okay, it's actually this frustrating little thing in there that is really what's going on. If that makes any sense.
It does. There's so many things you just said which resonate. The first thing I wanted to mention is that I've met people in the SRE community who are kind of gatekeepers and are sort of like, people can't join SRE straight out of university. And obviously that's clearly not true. And it's actually super important, I think, as an industry, to find ways to enable people to get into this field sooner. Otherwise, we can't just have this expectation that everyone's going to go in and be a developer for 10 years and then do sysadmin for 10 years and then they can get their SRE badge. It's ridiculous. So I'm really glad that you got that opportunity and it's worked out so well. That's the first thing. The second thing is what you just said about the seeing the big picture, having incident reports and that sort of clear evidence of something happening versus not quite being right. It really resonates from the performance engineering perspective, where often we'd be looking at a performance issue, like a really gnarly one, and there'd be all these people involved in a room, and people come with their perspectives, and they're very experienced and know a lot about what they do and their systems and their technologies, and they're like, it's got to be this, but there's no evidence to support it, or there's some flaky evidence, just, a signal which doesn't actually prove it. And it's very hard to have those conversations politically to say, look, I understand where you're coming from, but that doesn't actually prove it, and here's why. Did you find there's sort of a delicate conversation to be had in that situation?
I think that it's definitely difficult when you are as green as can be because you've just come from university and you don't have any other experience besides just this company, realistically, because they're not going to count the internship and they're not going to count personal projects or research groups you're a part of in school. That doesn't really apply. It's hard to kind of have I don't really want to say confidence because it's not really so much about confidence. It's more about, I mean, it's part of it for sure. Like, I remember when I first started, and once the lockdown lifted enough that we could go in, I don't know, everyone just seemed to like tower above me. And I don't think they're really like that tall. It's just like in my head, it's like everyone was like 7 feet tall, and I was just like, whoa. And I had to try to get over that basically because that's the thing. And it's definitely hard when this person is like, well, I've been doing this stuff since before you were born, so I think that I'm probably right. And the only way that you can really deal with that is, of course, being very diplomatic about it, not saying that they're wrong. You can't, because you don't want to really like be insistent that somebody is wrong about something, especially if you're not entirely sure, when they have so much kind of writing on this idea that they know what they're talking about. And it's not like they don't know what they're talking about. It's just that unless you really dig into this thing, it's not necessarily just what you think. And I think that basically what it is that if you are biased, which you will be if you have an entire point of view created by decades of experience in that one area, right? Then you're going to be biased. You're going to think about things, like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's what you're going to do. If you don't have that, there's a benefit and there's a detriment. Okay. The benefit is you don't have preconceived notions, which means that you can freely go through and you don't have any stake in any particular root cause. So you can very objectively look through and find, okay, I think this is it. The con is that if you don't have as much experience, it might be harder for you to identify the cause or imagine where things could go, because there's so many options. You have to really figure out, okay, you have to have an idea. Maybe it's something like this. So you go, okay, well, if that was the case, and you go down this whole sort of thing. The thing that I think really helped me is with all the bioinformatics, I was involved, actually still am involved at my alma mater in a research group called the Brain Engineers, where they do a lot of scientific research. And I did lots of programming and systems stuff for them. The purpose of me saying this is because this sort of biological stuff, right? It's science, right? You have some information, you use it to come up with different hypotheses, and they require you to test them. And you have criteria for acceptance and rejection, right? Like if it is like this, then this means it's validated. If it's not, then it's rejected. And there's a p-value and all the statistics that goes into it. That is not a perspective that I've met other software people have. They don't think about things that way. But that is my default of how I think about things.
I was going to say 2 weeks ago, before this recording, I released an interview with Courtney Nash, who she studies incidents, huge amounts of numbers of incidents, and gets real data and the way that you're talking about and presents it back to people. And they're just like, no. And they just fight her again. She's like, mean time to recovery is a terrible metric. It doesn't mean anything. And people are like, well, fight her against it. No, this is like the basis of my belief system. And so I can completely understand what you're talking about. Like, a lot of people, it's this human subjectivity that we can't escape.
It's very true. And I think that you do have to have enough experience, at least with the system architecture you're working with, in order to be able to hypothesize. So that's something that takes time in onboarding and even after. I mean, because onboarding, sure, we can say 60 to 90 days, but you're still going to be getting more familiar after that. I mean, you might be at like 90% at like 90 days, maybe, if everything goes well. But, you'll still always be learning things, right? Like if you're at a company and you're not learning anything new about the company or the infrastructure or just technology in general that you can apply there, then, I mean, what are you doing, right? Like that, you have to keep learning stuff. So as you get more and more experience with all this stuff, you can really figure out, okay, here's some different hypotheses. And then you have to go down those chains of how that works. Because the thing that's really hard, right, is having just some sort of evidence, some data, and not knowing really what it means and having to make a conclusion from that. Right? That's it, because there's a gluttony of data for any incident, especially if you capture it in the moment. So the one of the things that I always advocate and that I advocate a lot at eBay is capture the data before it's gone. Get a thread dump. Get heaps, get everything, get all this, the memory, the thread states. You have to get this stuff because it's going to be gone. And a lot of times it'll never be possible to get a complete root cause without that. So you have to do that. But once you're looking through that, you always have to remember that there are going to be things that are going to pop out at you as really obvious because they're screaming, right? It's like, oh, all the threads are used, or they're all waiting, or something like that. You'll see this stuff and it'll be really obvious. And you're like, oh, well, the problem is that all threads are in use. That's why this is broken. But that's not a root, that's a cause, but it's not a root cause, right? There's a difference. That is still, if you imagine like a recursive sort of hierarchy, everything, the root cause is like the first principles sort of thing, right? In like philosophy and logic, that's the beginning, right? Everything beyond that is both a cause and a symptom. It's a symptom of the root of the cause before it, and it's a cause usually of something else, and it splinters out like a spider web, and it affects so many things the further down the root cause is. And so it becomes increasingly difficult to figure out the real root cause of incidents that are so low in the stack, if that makes sense. Like if it's something that is like in the JavaScript of the front end, right? That's for one specific application in the front end. It's going to be it's not going to have any effects down, upstream of that, right?
Sure.
But if it's something like there's a server that stores all the tokens, right, that every application needs, then you're going to see a crazy pattern because some applications might have a cache. So some of them will have the token already. And then other ones will have to request a new token. Maybe every once in a while they get that server provides the tokens. And then everything in between there will start sputtering and failing, right? Because it doesn't have a token anymore. It won't authenticate. And it'll be really weird because you're like, well, this one thing isn't working. And then you might get really unhelpful errors, like something like nobody figured out that if there's a problem with that server, that there's like a cache server in between, and if it doesn't get a right response, then that cache server will send like a malformed response, and then the other things will be like, oh, special characters aren't expected in tokens, or like some weird thing, like they're like, what happened? Did somebody enter a wrong, and it gets really complicated, right? That's the sort of thing where you have to really, if you're so into maybe the JavaScript for that one thing, you're like, oh, it's probably some kind of JavaScript problem with how it's parsing the token because it's encrypted. It's probably decrypting it wrong. And that's the whole, but no, then you figure out it's totally different. And the thing is, every second of an outage at the scale of eBay is like $1 to $4 million if it's 100% outage, right? And if it's less than that, then it's not that same amount, but you can calculate it per second. And so lots of incidents are your entire salary. Like it'll be calculated afterward, not always, but a lot of times it gets calculated and it's like, oh yeah, that incident was like 4x of your salary, and that incident over there, oh, that was a bigger one. That was a few million, right? And if you can solve it faster than somebody else, you can save the company like your entire annual salary or multiple times. You talk about like a 10x developer, right? It's like you save 10x of your salary, in just one incident. Like I don't know. I just think that's kind of funny.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about your thoughts on, because obviously in their situation, the faster you can get an incident understood and resolved, or at least remediated, is absolutely key.
Yes.
But just before that, we talked a couple of weeks ago, and there was something that really stuck in my mind, which is this idea of, we've already kind of talked about a little bit, subjectivity and handling incidents and deciding. So say you get an alert, or there's a bunch of incidents open, or there's a dashboard with different red boxes, and a lot of the time it comes down to like, oh, this just feels like it's an important incident compared to this one, but there's no real data to back that up. Is that your experience? Have you seen that sort of thing in action?
So there are going to be red button signals, right, that are often brought to the forefront by people who are technically technical, okay, but they're not necessarily an SRE or a software engineer, or if they are, or maybe they've never been a software engineer ever, right? So I'm talking about like your technical duty officers. They're very good at what they do, but they're not deep in the stack, right? Their job is to look at a wall of monitors and their own computer and basically investigate a variety of Grafana dashboards, which are going to give a lot of graphs, right? And the thing is that it's a simplification, right, to say what I'm about to say. And I don't mean any offense to anybody, but and they know stuff because they've been there for a long time. They do have a technical background, and they do know various things about the stack. Maybe not as much as an SRE, but they know at least some stuff. And the longer they've been there, the longer they've been able to be like, oh, yeah, because their job is like, I see this thing. Hey, SRE, right? Here's the thing. Figure it out. SRE figures it out. And then they say, what was it? I need to write like an incident report. What happened? So they have like an initial incident like ticket. And then you later, as an SRE, make the root cause analysis, the full report. But they have stuff for their ticket. And then there's like problem managers that deal with the tickets or whatever. This is the whole structure, right? And so they know, okay, there's something going on here in the buying flow with this specific metric. Every time I've seen this metric go red, it resulted in us losing a lot of money. This is a big deal. SRE, do something. Also, I might call in other people as a technical duty officer that I know can help because I think this is a big deal. Sure.
Okay.
Now, part of it, though, is that they're looking at these graphs, and in a very real way, what they're kind of saying is, hey, that graph looks a little bit extra squiggly. SRE, do something. And I don't mean that in any way to demean what they're doing, but the problem is that is what it's not, it's an industry thing, right? Like whenever you have this kind of structure, that's kind of what happens, right? They don't have the time to look into it. That's what your job is. They're supposed to just find something and be like, hey, I think this could be a problem. And they have some experience that's guiding them. But at the end of the day, if you're not looking deeply into the incident, you're just looking at the graphs, all you can say is this looks really squiggly, basically. Because that's just here. It's a big dip, a big up and down, whatever. It's a squiggly line, right? And that's basically what it is. Like here's this one is steady for a while or a little bit, and then now here's a bigger one, the smaller one. This is subjectivity, right? This is I'm looking at this and I'm saying that looks too squiggly. I'm nervous about this, right? Right. I mean, it's funny. Yeah. I mean, it is funny in a way, right? But it is also true. And
if there's a person who had no idea of technology who was just sitting there watching it, they'd be like, that person just saw a squiggly line and called someone.
Right.
That's what's happening.
Right. Basically. I mean, yeah, basically, yeah. And so basically what happens from this, right, is that the SRE has to look into it because the technology officer is said to look into it. Depending on the mindset of the SRE, that SRE might feel pressure to find something. If you know what I mean, like the senior technical duty officer who has like 10 years of experience and maybe is like 20 years older or whatever, all this sort of stuff, right? Just told this junior SRE, here's a problem. And so the SRE is like, okay, I have to find the problem because there is a problem, right? But there might not be a problem. And if you have the mindset that there definitely is a problem, then you're going to find something. And you're going to be like, here is something I found. There will always be problems. Something will always be wrong that you can find. It didn't necessarily cause that, though. It could have been a symptom of something else. I mean, people pushing code all the time. there's interactions, there's network effects, there's sales, there's coupons going out there, there's sports events. When there's a sports event, people buy a whole bunch of stuff on eBay. I don't know why. I'm not a sports person. I don't do the sports ball, whatever. Um, but like
Yeah.
these things, right? And network effects and so on, but they're not necessarily actionable. It's just like something happened. It's blip, no big deal. But if you really are like, this is a thing, and then you escalate it as this whole thing, it's kind of a waste of time for everyone, because if it's not actionable, then there's no
Mhm.
point. You can't do anything. If
Mhm.
there's, if it's something that is maybe because of other effects in the world, you might be able to provide, like, for example, like extra demand. You might be able to, like, the technical duty officer can authorize in many cases more resources towards that application to kind of, it's not overclocking, because it just, you have a Kubernetes cluster and you just provide more, pods. You just spin up more, right? And just say, okay, put more, or add more threads or whatever. And that can work. That can work. The problem is, of course, there can be problems with that. I've had before that I can go into, but that's another story.
All right. So, in the situation where literally millions of dollars can be lost in seconds, uh, I have talked to many other people, and there's a line of thought around that kind of situation, and there's people very invested in particular kinds of observability, like distributed tracing and that kind of thing. But you had a different take, and I quite like this. So, what do you think? What was the key to you in those situations to remediate those incidents quickly?
Really, it's knowledge. You have to know what could go wrong. You have to know what is going on with the stack currently and in the past. You have to know if this sort of thing has happened before and what the solution was, and a variety of other things. All of this stuff, all this information exists somewhere, right? None of it is something you have to invent. The problem is
Mm.
accessing it. Some of it only exists in people's heads, so sometimes you have to call somebody up and you have to say, "Hey, you have experience with this kind of issue. I remember. What do you think could be going on here?" And then they can say, "Oh, right. I know exactly what happened because this happened like 2 months ago, or a year and a half ago, or 5 years ago, or whatever. And you should check this exact thing." And you check that exact thing, and sometimes that's correct and sometimes it's not. But a lot of time, it is, right? But that sucks for a couple of reasons. One reason, it's slow. You have to call up this person. You have to hope they respond. You have to wait for them to get internet and type and whatever. And if you're the only one that's on call and it's a Sunday or whatever, it's like there might be in the Bahamas. They could be on PTO. That one guy that knows the answer, right? So that's not going to help you. And the other thing is, it doesn't necessarily look good, because it's also like, well, what are you doing as an SRE if you can't figure it out and you have to call other people to give you the answer all the time? Like, you're not even doing anything. So you don't necessarily want to do that. Then the other thing is, you need to know, was there a promotion, right? That was a very common thing. There was a promotion. There was some kind of coupon event for a week. And now
Yeah.
that ended. And that's why we see a sudden drop. Nothing's wrong. It's just people aren't buying as much because it's more expensive now. But you don't necessarily know that. That's not necessarily on a Grafana dashboard. And then was there a code rollup? Well, that's a different web hook and everything. You have to go to this other place. You have to look there. And there's all these different places to look for different things. And some of it is really not very clear, right? And a lot of the documentation is not there because people don't necessarily see a need to write documentation about stuff that they're doing or code they're writing or whatever, right? So what you need realistically is to be able to semantically, right, say, this is what I see, typing it in to this system, right? I'm seeing this right now. Here's some specific data points. Has this happened before? Now, you're going to have years and years of root cause analysis reports where people have seen incidents and wrote a hopefully thorough analysis that included a hopefully correct root cause with hopefully detailed descriptions of what they saw and the numbers and maybe even screenshots and links and thread dumps, right? So you can't search that in real time, right? It's on, you have a Confluence usually, document where for this one root cause for this one thing and another one, you're not going to be able to search through and figure out which one is relevant to you in like 10 seconds. It's going to take too long, right? And Google is not going to help you when it's something specific to your infrastructure. And if you're all on-prem, eBay is completely on, even the VPNs, everything on-prem, okay? When everything's on-prem, you can't even say like, hey, here's a problem with, my Lambdas, right? And somebody's on the internet, it's like, oh, I've had the same problem with Lambdas before. It's because of this authorization. You don't have that. Everything is bespoke. It's a big company. It's been around for a long time. Why would you use Splunk? Because you existed before there was Splunk. You made your own and you're still using it. Why? Because you made it. Why would you switch to something that does the same thing and pay someone money? Doesn't make any sense. So that's going to be hard. Even if you need I need a special aggregation query for this thing. Well, that's your own bespoke language that you're using there. No one on Google, no Stack Overflow knows. So what you really need, ideally, is to know everything yourself and take notes on a whole bunch of stuff and put it all in your head.
It's easy. Just know everything. Just know everything.
Yes. This is the value of experience.
Hyper-searchable.
This is the value of experience. That the more experience you are in that company, the more you've seen. And the more you understand, the more meetings you've been in where somebody's like, okay, I just created this thing. Here's how it works. But nobody in the meeting took any notes. Or their notes were like, oh, they added some super esoteric stuff. But it's like that. There's no big picture. That doesn't help. Right. And something like that. So you gather this over time, and then you keep your own notes and you write down stuff in there and you put it in bullet points, and you like, this is important and this is important and this is how this works. And maybe you even write wiki stuff, and then you can search that stuff. That's basically what you have to do. It takes a long time. However, one thing that I do have to say though, is there is something that can make this easier. And what I would say would make this whole process easier, something that I wish that I had when I was at eBay, is to leverage the power of large language models that we now have when we're living in this era of ChatGPT and OpenAI and Google Bard and all this kind of stuff, where you can use, the company I work for, Control Stack has a product called PromptOps, which does this very specific thing. So what you can do, and you could use PromptOps, or you could probably make your own if you wanted for your own corporation or whatever. But it makes sense to use something that's already established and working. But basically, you have your Confluence documents, and you have your Jira tickets, and you have your Google Drive, PDFs and whatever else in there, all this information that is relevant, that I'm saying that there's information here and here and here and here and here, or Slack messages where people just briefly discussed something and so on, but isn't in a easy to search document, right? So you put in all your tokens, pulls the data from all this stuff, uses the OpenAI magic, right? And it makes it semantically searchable. And then you can say, this is what I'm seeing. Has this happened before? It'll search through all that stuff, and in 10 seconds, right? You need 10 seconds or less, right? 10, 15 seconds maybe, or even less, depends on how much data you have to go through, obviously, and whatever, if you're running on AWS or whatever, that kind of thing, right? And then you get an answer, and it's like, this happened, here's the details what happened, here's, just like ChatGPT can give you all this stuff if you give it the right information. And then here's the steps. And then you can try that. And there's here's a source. And here's a source of all this information you can verify if you want. But now you can just quickly be like, the TDO is breathing down your neck, like, hey, SRE, what's the solution? We need to solve this. We need to stem the bleeding immediately. And then, you can just be like, oh, here's the thing. Because otherwise you have to be like, okay, let me think really fast on my feet and try to figure something out, which is an important skill to have no matter what. And that's kind of what I had to do, basically. And that became easier as I got more experience. But it's really what could possibly be happening? Try this. This might help while I'm looking into something deeper. That's the kind of general thing where it's really like a triage environment. You're, in I don't know, some kind of, oftentimes it feels so intense. It feels like you're in a trauma ward or something, and you have to go between, because sometimes multiple things are happening at once, and it's I have to solve this thing and this thing and this thing all at the same time, and these things are different magnitudes, and it's okay, well, triage, it's really triage at that point, right? Which one needs to be handled in which order based off severity, and it's complicated. But the key thing is, with enough knowledge is power. With enough knowledge, you can figure out what is likely to be going on. And that is really important.
Two kind of maybe concerns come to mind with. I think it's a cool idea, and it makes sense to me. I have my own personal knowledge base for not just my work but my life. Like I put everything in there, so I can always go back and find it. So I know the value of this for sure. One thing is the idea of connecting up an LLM to chat, like Slack, for example. Is there any sort of privacy concerns about that, like pulling in data from everyone's different Slack discussions, or would you maybe limit it to particular channels which are based on, this is the channel for incidents or something?
Well, you can really control that. So, considering the prompt ops work which I work with, right? I know because I created the Slack integration for prompt ops. To answer your question specifically, I have it set up with a variety of configurations. You can configure it. So first of all, it does not read from direct messages. There technically, okay. I've never implemented it, but technically there exists a Slack permission called like super user, I think it is, that can read everything, including DMs. But I've never set that up. It just has a regular token. It's specific to a workspace. So whatever workspace, so if you have 10 different workspaces and only 2 of them are technical, right? You can just put it in there and you don't have to put it in the other ones. And, for any given workspace, it'll work only siloed within the context of that workspace, right? So if you have your SRE workspace, then it's there. And then if you have your marketing workspace, then it's only marketing stuff. So if your marketing people are like, hey, what ideas do people have about what we're going to do in second quarter or whatever, right? Then it'll pull from that workspace of like, here's the marketing ideas. So that already kind of silos it a bit to keep some privacy, but you can also put in, there's also configurations for channels and things like that. If you really don't want to put in your fitness channel because you really don't want people to be able to semantically search how many pounds you can deadlift or whatever, that's fine. But I mean, technically it can only join channels that are like public. So that means that you could also have just search that information if you have access anyways. So, I mean, in that regard, it's not really it's not the same magnitude as if it was reading either direct messages or if it was like in like a personal system, right? We're talking about a work environment that is, for work stuff. And so, I mean, if you're typing your social security number in the work channel, that's kind of weird. I don't know why you'd be, say, this is where I live, or that would be odd. And you probably would want to delete that message.
It's more like, private messaging might have a moan about something now and again, and you might not want people to be able to search using a product.
So in that case, that would be DMs because DMs are not searchable, right? Because Slack in general is searchable, right? It has a built-in search tool. So if there was something you didn't want some people to see, you would want to do a DM, right? You wouldn't want it to be something, because who knows, right? Maybe you live in a company, maybe you work in a company where there's like management searching through everything. They'd be like, oh, is anyone talking bad about the company, right? So, and if you're worried about that already, you would restrict it to DMs. But I mean, technically, if they really wanted to, the administrator can read DMs if it's work related. So anything that's too personal, you probably don't want to have on your work Slack in general.
Yeah. One more thing that came to mind is that I know ChatGPT is really good at giving very confident answers about things which sometimes make no sense whatsoever. I'm guessing within the context of incident management, that's probably not a huge risk, because you're still going in with your own lens of like, I have a certain level of understanding already, and then it'll either enrich that and you can sort of make a call on whether that's helpful or not.
Right. So here's the main thing. There's a big difference between ChatGPT and the OpenAI API, because the OpenAI API allows for a lot more than just your standard dialogue with ChatGPT, because it allows you, for example, to create vector embeddings from any sort of textual data, which then it has like cosine similarity and other even better functions for comparing the similarity between that and other, like a query. So for example, you can do something like that, like here's all of your data and here's a query, and it can use this embeddings to figure out what is relevant to this query and then return that. Return back as much data as you want. It'll have a similarity score and a link to where it originally got that. So that is just a basic comparison. Then on top of that, you can have it using the API process everything that was returned and give me some sort of analysis of the return data based off of the query. And you can have in your code hard-coded prompts in there where it's like, this is an incident analysis situation, and here's like a few sentences or whatever and some examples, which is like a primer that then the OpenAI can receive and use this information along with this primer and the original query to figure out what it should tell you about what happened. But always you can receive the actual response with a link for the context for every single part of what went into this. So you can tune the hallucinations, so to speak. You don't have to make it be 100% just guessing.
I nearly what hallucinations were about 2 weeks ago, so I understood that one.
Awesome.
Awesome. Valeska, it's been awesome to talk to you about your experiences at eBay and the whole idea of getting the information you need to deal with an incident really rapidly. That's awesome. I think that's a really interesting field of work. And I'll put a link in the description to the Prompt Ops product that you're working on because I think it's interesting. People want to know about it. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we close off for this session?
Man, I mean, there's some. I almost feel like we need to have another session. I mean, we can. I would be totally down with that because, I mean, like I literally have an entire like 10-page document of things from eBay that like I've remembered written down over time, and I mean, there's so many things about the nitty-gritty of resolving incidents, and I have incidents in here that I remember that I wrote down, where I can kind of walk through by memory, like this is the steps that needed to be taken and how like other people had their own idea. This is what it is. And then I had to come in and I was like, no, here's a different approach. And then I was able to substantiate that and actually permanently solve the problem when the other people, couldn't, because I used a different approach. And that sort of approach I think is important. And then, I mean, there's of course all sorts of other things in regards to SRE in general. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of information.
Thank you once again for coming on the show. And we'll catch up again, and there'll be another episode soon. And to everyone else, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you all then.
Bye.